Welcome, language learners from all around the globe, to Listen Up, the podcast that takes you on a captivating voyage through the English language. Whether you've just started your journey or have been navigating the intricacies of English for some time, this podcast is designed to be your trusty compass, guiding you towards fluency and unlocking the wonders of English. I'm your host, Karen, a passionate traveller and an experienced teacher of English as a second language. Join me as we embark on an exciting expedition filled with British history read by a native speaker. Together, we'll conquer the challenges and celebrate the victories of learning English as a foreign language. Each episode of Listen Up will immerse you in a variety of topics, from aspects of British culture, history, and literature. We'll explore useful vocabulary that will empower you to communicate confidently in English. If you want to read along with the podcast, head to my website www.onepawinthesand.com/ESL. The link is in the description. But this podcast isn't just about learning English in isolation. It's about building a community of language learners, supporting one another, and fostering a love of the English language. I encourage you to engage with us through my Patreon page, where you can connect with fellow learners, ask questions, and share your own language journey. So, whether you're sipping tea in Tokyo, walking the streets in Sao Paulo, or studying in a bustling cafe in Berlin, Listen Up is here to accompany you on your quest for English fluency. Join me as we embark on this transformative expedition, where language becomes an adventure and your dreams of effective communication become a reality. Today's episode is called Fuel Protests. In the year 2000, England had many protests about expensive fuel. People called these protests the fuel protests. These protests happened because the cost of fuel was going up a lot, and it made many people unhappy with how the government taxed fuel and how it affected their daily lives. The fuel protests started on this day, 8th of September, because petrol and diesel were getting more and more expensive. Back then, it cost about 80 pence for 1 litre of fuel, which was a lot. This happened not only in England, but also in other places in Europe, because the whole world had problems with the cost of oil. This was because some countries that supplied oil had trouble, and more people wanted oil. So why did people protest? Here are some reasons. 1. High taxes. People were upset because the government put a lot of tax on fuel. When you bought 1 litre of fuel, a big part of the money you paid was for taxes like VAT and fuel duties. This made fuel even more costly for regular people. 2. Life got harder. When fuel costs a lot, it affects how people live. People who had to travel a lot for work or lived in the countryside had a tough time because they needed to use their cars a lot. Also, everything started to cost more because businesses had to pay more for fuel, and they passed those costs on to the customers. 3. Trouble for farmers. Farmers had it tough too. Fuel was expensive, so their farming expenses went up, making it even harder to make money in farming. The protests started in September 2000, when a group called the People's Fuel Lobby organised a lot of trucks and lorries to block places where they kept and sent out fuel. This caused problems with getting fuel everywhere, and people started to buy a lot of fuel in a panic. more and more people joined the protests, like truck drivers, farmers, and regular people who cared about this issue. They stood outside petrol stations and fuel centres and asked for the government to lower the taxes on fuel. The government, led by Prime Minister Tony Blair, had a hard time dealing with the protests. At first, they said no to the protesters' requests, thinking that if they lowered the fuel taxes, it would hurt public services and the government's money. But as the protests got bigger and louder, the government decided to give in a bit. They reduced the taxes on fuel for a little while and said they would talk with the protest organisers. The protests eventually stopped as the government made some small changes and the protesters gave up. Even though the protesters got some of what they wanted, it didn't completely solve the problems with taxes and fuel prices. The protests in 2000 showed that when many people come together to speak out, they can make the government listen and change its decisions. But it also made people think about how the economy works and how we can make it better. Now in 2023, England is once again talking about expensive fuel. The price of petrol has gone up a lot, reaching £1.50 for 1 litre in the early summer. This shows that the problem with fuel costs and taxes are still around, and we need to find a better solution for everyone. And that wraps up another episode of Listen Up. I hope you enjoyed learning about my topic today and practicing your English. Remember, the exploration doesn't have to end here. If you have any lingering questions or want to continue the conversation, I've got some great opportunities for you. First off, I offer private lessons for those of you eager to expand your knowledge further, whether it's practicing today's subject or exploring other topics. I'm here to guide you on your English journey. Reach out to me through my website or social media platforms, and let's embark on a personalised learning experience together. I have been involved with training people for more than 10 years. I've been teaching English as a second language for over a year, in which time I have taught over 500 students, many of whom are regulars. But wait, there's more. If you're a devoted fan of Listen Up and want to show your support, consider joining our Patreon community. Your contribution directly helps us bring you more episodes and maintain the quality of our show. Your support truly means the world to me, and we couldn't continue this podcast without you. So whether you choose private lessons or Patreon, or both, I look forward to staying connected and exploring the fascinating realms of English as a second language together. Thank you once again for joining us on Listen Up. Until next time, keep practicing.